Rosie Rose, and today we're going to be talking about a short piece called Negation versus Effacement. Though similar, a distinction is needed between what leads to sublimation and what leads only to neuroses and cessation. A lot of times in philosophy you end up making a lot of distinctions between terms that seem like similes or that are usually used like similes, and that causes a lot of trouble, like between justice and fairness, negative freedom, positive freedom, to allude to Isaiah Berlin. Philosophy is very often in the business of distinctions, and when we don't make those distinctions, that has problems. Wittgenstein had that line where he said, the limits of my world, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. In a similar way, the expressions of my language are the expressions of my world. And so when we don't make certain distinctions between terms, we can get very confused. I've been doing this series with Dr. Last, Adalin, Mr. Adalin, and Mr. Ebert on the philosophy of lack. And we've talked a lot about the problems that arise if you don't integrate with lack, if you don't accept lack, if you run from lack to wholeness. But of course, it's kind of funny because at the same time, there's a sense in which we want to be whole, right? I mean, we want some sort of harmony. That's why we want to integrate with lack. So stuff gets kind of confusing very quickly, where you have to make distinctions between this primordial unity that Freud talks about, or ultimate wholeness, which is a return to the womb, which, of course, that symbolically connects with the idea of finding the perfect job, finding the perfect partner, returning to Eden, all these ways of finding ultimate contentment, if you will, ultimate satisfaction. Well, the problem with these dreams and these idealisms is that one is not integrating with lack. They're running from lack. They're running from the void per se, as opposed to facing it. So what we want to do is instead integrate with lack and to accept lack and to learn to live with lack. But why do we want to do that? Doesn't that sound kind of nihilistic? Now, hopefully the philosophy of lack has made clear that these are not the same things. But, there's a very real sense in which, if maybe we would be happier just seeking and living according to primordial unity, these illusions of ultimate wholeness. Are we really so sure that integration with lack is better? What's the difference? Well, the argument is that when we seek ultimate wholeness, what ends up happening is we efface ourselves and enter into a lot of neurosis. Our partner never brings us ultimate happiness, but if we expect them to do so, when they inevitably fail, we get angry at them, we get upset. When we get into the job that we think will make us happy, and it turns out to not be perfect because nothing is perfect, we might get in an endless cycle of what are called whole hopes, with HOLE, based on that paper, where we're just always leaving a job, never committing to anything, seeking something that doesn't exist because we don't learn to integrate and accept and manage the ultimate imperfection of everything. So integrating with lack is living with. It's a kind of living with, learning to accept the fact that you're going to die as opposed to ignoring the fact that you're going to die. So it's not nihilist, and hopefully the philosophy of lack 2 discussion made that very clear. And the idea is that ironically, when you seek ultimate wholeness, you end up effacing your life. You end up in neuroses, and you end up just kind of never advancing. You end up just ceasing because you're always caught up in these illusions. Whereas when you integrate with lack, you undergo a negation, a Hegelian negation. And in Hegel, negation is always linked up with sublimation, which is the arising of something new. I'm sure most people, you hear that idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis in Hegel. Now, I think that's a problematic idea. And hopefully the piece on Hegelian dialectics by O.G. Rose illuminates this point. But the main idea is that in a sublimation, you have this arising of something new, or a new horizon, a new possibility space that contains the old, that doesn't erase the old, but now begins entering into a kind of relationship with the old to discover and open up new possibilities. So there's no synthesis in the sense that the old is done away with or solved. The old is still present, but it exists in a concert with some new possibilities. So when you integrate with lack, it's not that the lack vanishes, but you learn to live in a new way with the lack. You learn to appreciate the parts of your job that you thought that aren't, it's not always perfect, but you learn to appreciate it. You learn to see it fitting in concert with the rest of your life and helping you perhaps learn to mentally overcome disappointment and to actually learn to be present in that job. So there's a sublimation that occurs. There's an acceptance of the lack where you, and in doing that, you negate from your life the possibility of finding ultimate wholeness precisely to open up a space where you learn to live fully in that lack of ultimate wholeness, which then gives rise to a new life, a new good life. And the end of reconstructing as I will describe with that. So the negation opens up a space where a new way of life is possible. Whereas in effacement, you're always seeking that ultimate wholeness, but no new life ever emerges or becomes possible because you're always seeking a thing that isn't possible, ultimate wholeness. So you never negate that possibility of ultimate wholeness from your life to move into a space of sublimation where a new way of living can occur. Similar things in the philosophy of lack. There's this fine balance between talking about how it's good that we're going to die because we can't be cancerous, but then at the same time, there's this bad death of effacement where you don't die well if you seek effacement and primordial unity and not accepting the world for what it is on its own terms. So not all deaths are equal, but then you have to walk this fine line between talking about the bad death and the good death, and how death has a necessary function, because so it becomes easy to get confused, and understandably so. The hope of this work has been by making a distinction between effacement and a negation, where negation is good, and that's what we're seeking. And yeah, that's a moral claim, but and I hesitate to make moral claims, or a claim that sounds moral at least, but I do think we want to meaningfully define better ways of living than not. Otherwise, what's the point of thinking if everything ultimately is equal? I do think it's better to live a life that integrates with lack, so that you undergo negation and a sublimation as a result, as opposed to not integrating with lack and ending up in effacement, which just leads to neuroses, tons of marital problems, relational problems, and stuff like that, and ultimate cessation. So, in a way we could say that effacement is a kind of canceling out without sublimation, whereas negation is a kind of canceling out that entails sublimation, where there's not actually a canceling out. There's an acceptance of the inability to solve per se, and instead to move in a space of management and living with, as opposed to escaping. So negation entails a living with, while effacement is an effort to escape. We could put it that way. So hopefully that distinction proves useful, and hopefully it clarifies some things, both for the Philosophy of Lack series and in the work of Dr. Last, myself, Adalin, and Ebert as we move forward. For more about O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, and thank you for your time.